Ask not what your gender can do for you. Ask what you can do for your gender. Welcome and thank you for coming. I'm Cody Suzuki, a local spoken word artist from nearby Massachusetts. It's my pleasure to be opening for tonight's play, and I'd like to open with an age-old question. Why does a chicken cross the road? Is it just to get to the other side, as if to conquer some great divide? What if I were born like that chicken? After all, it's from an egg I did hatch. Would there still be some gender one should attach? Boy or girl, girl or boy, was I not just a bundle of joy? Pink or blue, blue or pink, on the birth certificate, signed in ink, before I could even think. Where is that chicken on the road? What if there were no other side? Then who would be there to decide, boy or girl, pink or blue, which one are you? He or she? Well, what about me? Perhaps I am just like that chicken who came to a road, and the crossing is only allowing my journey to unfold. Hey, thank you very much. I also had a request for this old piece, so I would like to share with you this too. This is called Mirror, Mirror. Mirror, mirror on a wall, who is the fairest of them all? Why, mirror, mirror, I don't find you fair at all. Why is it you only reflect in shape, size, and color when there's so much more to me that you choose to neglect? Why, mirror, mirror, you have no idea of my personality, my gender, or my sexuality, and I bet you've never even heard of spirituality. Why, mirror, mirror, you have not looked into my eyes, or felt from my heart. But oh, mirror, mirror, this is where true humanity lies, and in here, I wear no disguise. Mirror, mirror on the wall, you don't really see me at all. And mirror, mirror, that's just not there at all. Thank you very much. I've been asked to leave you with just a little tiny nursery rhyme. This is actually one of my family's favorite. And it goes like this. There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. For she had forgotten who was pink and who was blue. I know what I can do, said that old woman who lived in a shoe. So without further ado, she laced up that shoe and she called each child aside. She said, I will let you decide who is pink and who is blue. It's all up to you, said an old woman from a shoe. And thank you very much, and please enjoy tonight's play.
I've always done my best to be a decent person, and I feel that's what should have really mattered, and I've always tried to emphasize that with my family. I don't really drink a lot of alcohol, and I never have. I've never been into partying. I've always worked for what I have.
I'm like, okay, fine. Call me what you want. I don't care. I know who I am. I'm TV elite, male, female, whatever, and it literally does not affect me anymore like it used to. Because in our culture, in Two-Spirit society, we are very gender fluid with Two-Spirit people. You have Two-Spirit people that go through a rebirthing process to live as a gender that they were not born into. In the Two-Spirited Native community, I really don't have to alter myself because I already live a life which is what we call living in beauty. Right relations with myself.
And I was telling her, the director of the LGBTQ Center, this movie Transamerica is an incredibly stereotypical and offensive portrayal of trans women. And she said, well, I don't think it's offensive. Well, I was, and I didn't know what to say to that because, okay, hey, You may be the director of this, but like the difference between the two of us is okay, you know? You've read about this and you've done your research. But I've actually lived this. So don't tell me what is and isn't offensive.
Hello? Yes, this is Stephen. Oh, hi. Thanks for calling me back. I really appreciate it. Yes. So as I mentioned in my email, I'm doing a series of interviews with transgender men and women here in Rhode Island. Yes, that's right. That's exactly it, to get these stories down so they can be shared. Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. I really appreciate it. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay, great. Great. All right. I'll see you then. It's June 10th, and I'm Stephen Pennell, and I'm speaking with...
What if you kind of just say, these people don't identify me, I do? Then I think that's really the turning point.
It's May 5th, and I'm Stephen Pennell, and I'm speaking with...
Thinking back as far as I can, I've always had a pretty strong sense of gender identity, and it did not match up with whoever everyone else thought I was. My parents figured, oh, the doctor says female, she must be a female.
So it's May 11th, and I'm Stephen Pennell, and I'm speaking with...
I was born the 29th of July, 1968, in a world that did not know what the T meant in LGBT, much less the LGB.
Today is the 28th of July, and I'm Stephen Pennell, and I'm speaking with...
But I do remember there was a couple of times, putting on my mom's heels and a dress or two. I kind of felt good. What the hell did I know? I was a kid, I thought all boys did that.
My name is Stephen Pennell, and it's May 7th, and I'm speaking with...
It's a long, complicated story. Just lots and lots of years of just repression and repression.
It's June 11th, and I'm Stephen Pennell, and I'm speaking with...
I think historically for trans women, this is one of the core issues of our being. It's that adherence to masculinity. It tends to be enforced more stringently and more violently than female adherence to an idea of femininity.
My name is Stephen Pennell, and it's June 10th, and I'm speaking with...
Ari.
It's May 5th.
Cameron.
So it's the 11th of May.
Tiffany.
It's the 28th of July.
Josie.
It's May 7th.
Eli.
It's June 11th.
Kara.
Thank you so much for meeting with me. I really appreciate you taking the time. As I mentioned on the phone, we're gathering oral histories of transgender men and women here in Rhode Island. And these interviews will be utilized for an archive, and some of the stories will be utilized for a performance at the Providence campus of URI. It's our intention to honor and celebrate the lives of the transgender men and women who are portrayed. It's also an opportunity to help educate the larger cisgender community to the struggles and the successes and the lives of the transgender community. Oh, you can choose to use your name or a pseudonym, or you can remain completely anonymous. It's entirely up to you. So are you okay with using your own name?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, okay, great. So, to begin with, would you share your story and your experiences in terms of your gender identity?
Well, I was born the 29th of July, 1968, in a world that did not know what the T meant in LGBT, much less the LGB. So, I would say by 1971, I was dressing in my great-grandmother's doll clothes. She had these old Barbie doll clothes, for the large-size dolls, and I dressed in them, but I knew there was something wrong with that, so I hid it. I would build little forts like little boys do, and then hide in the fort and dress.
I was 5 or 6 years old, shopping for school clothes for the first time, and I picked out this gorgeous Garanimals outfit. They were animal-themed coordinates, so if you had the giraffe top, the giraffe bottom matched it. Anyway, I was with my mother when we were shopping at the Rhode Island Mall, which used to be called the Midland Mall.
Yeah.
And I picked out this great Garanimals outfit. It was a mini dress with leggings. And my mother just looked at me and laughed because ostensibly, for all the world, I was a little boy.
one of my first ever memories is when I was about 7 years old, and my sister is walking downstairs, and she catches me with the backwards hat on and no shirt, singing to the Backstreet Boys. And so ever since then, I was her little brother. I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. She would try to ridicule me, but I was just like, yeah, I am your little brother.
I guess some say they can remember way, way back. I have a few vague memories. Probably one of my first memories is, how boys do this, girls do that. And it was based upon, I was upset because I couldn't wear a one-piece bathing suit like my girl neighbor could.
Okay, so I usually always start with the disclaimer that my story is just mine. So it's not representative of every trans person, and my story is actually pretty unusual compared to most of the trans people I know. I don't really have any formal memories before the age of 13. Most trans folks will have stories like, oh, I remember when I was 3 or 5, and there's just none of that for me.
So this clothing choice for school kind of started an avalanche. My family was extremely typical Cranston Italian American. So they thought it was funny for a little bit, a very short period of time, that their 5-year-old son was insisting he was a girl. But it stopped being funny very quickly, and I spent most of my childhood being punished for one feminine expression or another.
Uh-huh.
Ever since I was a child, I felt male, and I was just always called a tomboy because I liked to wear men's clothing. And everyone just figured that it was just a phase. And I remember my mom even said, maybe she's gay. Maybe that's it. But you can't explain gender identity when you're 5, 6 years old. But you can feel it,
Uh-huh. According to the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH, the term gender identity is defined as a person's intrinsic sense of being male, a boy or man, female, a girl or woman, or an alternative gender. Transgender, genderqueer.
Around the time I was putting on my mom's heels and a dress or two, I kind of felt good, but what the hell did I know? I was a kid, I thought all boys did that. Anyway, we moved from Newark, New Jersey to a small town called Kenilworth, which is Suburbiaville, a little over a square mile in New Jersey, and about a year and a half in, I was raped from a neighbor. I never said nothing. And the reason was because I was wearing girls' panties. Because I was ashamed. I thought I had done something wrong. I thought it was my fault that I got raped. And, maybe if I didn't have the panties on, who knows. It's a demon I still battle with. And any feelings I did have about being different in that way, don't put it in the closet. Put it in the grave and bury it. And for many years, it stood that way.
If I would open my mouth and not speak in a masculine enough way, my father would respond with increasing violence. And I think for trans women, this is one of the core issues of our being. It's that adherence to masculinity. It tends to be enforced more stringently, more violently than female adherence to an idea of femininity. And so the classic thing is tomboys. Tomboys are treated a little less harshly, a little more humanely than feminine boys.
So I remember, I was on the football team, and I was actually a pretty kick-ass linebacker. And I was on the baseball team. I was one of the guys because that's really what I was, I remember being like, yeah, I'm a boy. I remember saying I wanted to be standing up just like my brother.
To be honest with you, I went through most of my life never thinking really anything about my gender.
Obviously, gender it's not who you are. It doesn't define you, but it's definitely a part of who you are. And when your gender doesn't match your sex, it can become an even bigger part of who you are because you can end up fighting a battle.
That is until I graduated from grad school and I started dating women. And that dynamic kind of made me understand that, like, oh yeah, I'm not really a woman that loves women. I'm actually a man that loves women.
Ah.
For several years, I dressed in my great-grandmother's doll clothes until I got too big for those clothes. And then I would play dress-up with a female cousin of mine about the same age. And I dressed all through junior high school. My mom had remarried by then, and I had 2 stepsisters, both about my size, so that helped. Until my older sister caught me. And then she thoroughly embarrassed me in front of her friends, and well, then she told my mom, so my mom knew.
It never occurred to me until a few years later that I wasn't actually a girl. I remember thinking explicitly as a child that all the boys had to pretend that they wanted to be boys when really everybody knew we were girls. That's how my young mind came to terms with being trans.
I can remember a lot of conversations with my mom where looking back now, I can totally see that's what I was trying to make sense of it. And I was trying to figure out what was going on.
I don't remember the exact moment, but I took a really long time getting right in my mind before changing my body, so I think I formally came out probably around 2007. I was living in Tampa, Florida at that time, which is not a super accepting, friendly place. I was seeing this one particular therapist because I needed a really long time talking to someone who really understood trans issues. I was sort of going back and forth at that time between, am I really gender nonconforming or am I really a trans man? So do I just play with gender or is this really my gender?
The WPATH states that gender nonconforming describes individuals whose gender identity, role, or expression differs from what is normative for their assigned sex in a given culture and historical period. The idea of gender role or expression relates to the characteristics in personality, appearance, behavior that in a given culture and historical period are designated as masculine or feminine.
My mom, she didn't approve, but she didn't disapprove either. I mean, she told me it was wrong and that I shouldn't do it, but I didn't get a spanking or anything that, I had confused feelings about that too. I mean, she was so neutral about it. I mean, is this right or is it wrong?
So flash forward through high school, I'm like, it's a long, complicated story. Just lots and lots of years of repression and repression. I was super depressed. I was like self-harming, using drugs. I used drugs for about 3 years in high school. I've been clean now for 4 years now, thankfully, but this was after I graduated high school.
Well, somewhere around the 7th grade, I got involved with drugs, like everybody else, smoking weed, trying to be cool, trying to fit in, By high school, I was a major pill pusher.
By the time I was 10 or 11 years old, I just came to the point where I sublimated, like a lot of trans youth do. I just accepted that I would never actually be who I was, so my identity at the time was a compromised position as a gay male.
I feel as I grew up, society kind of pushed on me, oh, you're a tomboy, you're a girl, you're a tomboy, that's it, you're just going through a phase. So I was like, oh, well, all right, that must be it, because that's what they had told me. And then I get to high school, and I said, all right, you know what? I'm gay. That's it. I'm gay. But it turns out that's not what I was.
After high school, I ended up moving in with my girlfriend at the time, and her roommate was a trans guy, and I had no idea you could actually do that.
There were a couple of other kids at high school who were transgender, and I remember talking to them, and it was kind of a sense of relief. It was a big sense of relief because I realized that there were people who were just like me.
When I first met him, I just thought he was just this cute little gay guy because he had this awesome beard, and he's like, no, I'm straight. And I'm like, you're straight? No way! And then he ended up coming out to me like, yeah, I mean, I'm trans. I've been on T for 2 years. And I'm like, no way! I'm just sitting there in disbelief.
So it took a lot of soul searching and just trying to say, okay, am I really a man? I was like, no one sees me as a man, or I don't act like a man. Maybe because I wasn't socialized like a man, I'm not really a man. There's a lot of self-doubt.
So I quit high school. I went into the service. I kind of figured this would straighten me out, but I didn't do too well there either. I got out. I got a job. I always had girlfriends. I had a few bar sexual experiences, gay experiences, well, whatever. I got married. I had 2 daughters and a son. I got married again. But through that whole time, I was getting extremely high all the time. I never felt anything. I didn't feel love. The only thing I ever felt was a sense of rage and hate. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that the hate was towards myself.
Oh, I knew from an early age I was joining the military. My family's poor, still is. So I knew I was joining the military right out of high school. I did 21 years in the Navy. But knowing that trans people are automatically forbidden from the military, I hid it the entire time I was in the Navy.
Wow.
Yeah, cross-dressing aboard a ship was not going to happen.
The ban on transgender soldiers serving openly in all branches of the U.S. military was lifted on June 30th, 2016. President Trump's ban has been indefinitely stayed, and transgender men and women were allowed to enroll as of January 1st, 2018. Best estimates are there are over 8,000 transgender soldiers currently serving in the armed forces.
Oh, you like making noises, don't you? Oh, you just want the attention.
She's precious.
Yeah. She's gonna get everything I ever owned. I'm gonna make sure of that. She gets it all. She almost died in childbirth.
Wow.
Yeah, so did my daughter.
Whoa.
I am so lucky to have them both still alive.
Right.
My daughter's at a job interview, and I was like, well, I'll take the baby, and, if you get the job, that'd be awesome.
That's good. That's good.
Well, yeah, because they both live with me.
How about your other 2 children?
My other 2 children. Well, Abigail is my middle daughter, and she thinks it's disgusting and that I'm no longer her father. Now my son, after my son was told in September, August of 14, he decided that he was going to tell his mother on Easter Sunday that he was gay. And guess who got blamed for the gay gene on that one?
But being a gay male was an identity I never quite internalized. Always felt like a facade or something foreign to me. As foreign as it would have felt to pretend to be a hyper-masculine, heterosexual male.
A year goes by and I'm like, my head's going crazy after meeting this guy. My head's going nuts. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to think. And I'm just sitting there like, no, I'm a lesbian, you know? I'm not transgender. Because everything that I've been taught has been so negative. No, you can't do this. You're a girl. You're a lesbian. And as time goes by, I get these like creeping feelings that like, no, I'm not a lesbian. I'm not a lesbian. Like, what am I? What am I?
I went from a little kid who knew what they were feeling for the most part. I mean, not quite sure, but the feelings were there. I just wasn't sure how to word it. I wasn't sure what to do with it. What I realized was that sometimes your body and your brain don't match up, and that's okay.
I guess for me, I mostly knew in terms of physical things about my body that were bothering me, which is really common for a lot of trans people. You know, they don't really feel like their physical self matches the gender that's in their brain, and that was very, well, I mean, it still is very true for me. You know, I didn't like my breasts. I definitely don't like down there, but I have found that taking hormones and transitioning has helped me feel better about those parts of my body.
Uh-huh.
So I saw an ad in the New York Times, late 80s, early 90s, where Pan Am was hiring flight attendants, international flight attendants, based in London, to fly all over the world. You had to speak a foreign language. I grew up speaking Italian with my family, also studied German at NYU, so I applied and I got the job as a flight attendant. And I think it was one of those compromise steps. It was my way of acting out. This bohemian, gay male intellectual working as a flight attendant was a bridge type way to live. It allowed me to show the feminine parts of myself without actually transitioning, which at the time would have been very difficult.
Transitioning is a process during which an individual changes from a gender role associated with their sex assigned at birth to a different gender role. This process may or may not include procedures to allow the person to live more fully in the sex they identify with, as opposed to the sex assigned at birth. So, what is the process? What's going on in your head? How do you get there that you are in fact trans?
I was in my junior year of high school. I kind of started saying, all right, I'm identifying as male. I'm gonna go by Cameron. This is who I am. Respect it. So then I started having some issues with mental health because I was trying to get onto testosterone. Finally, I found a therapist who I liked and who understood me. She saw me as a person who was identifying as male, and that's really all I could ask for, really, being treated like a human being.
Right.
So, my junior year of high school, that's really when I was going for the hormones or whatnot. That was a really rough time for me, January going into March. I started really struggling.
I started to transition slowly in 2009. This was after 5 or 6 years of therapy where I did nothing. No physical transition, not even uttering the word to anybody else except myself and other like-minded people like myself. So anyway, in 2009, I started taking some testosterone. I didn't take the full shot. I was just sort of taking a little bit to get a little bit. And then in 2011, in March, I actually came out at work. And everyone was super accepting. Because I feared if I came out, I would lose my job and all these horrible things would happen. And some of those things do happen to trans people.
In 1989, I met my now ex-wife. And after about 3 weeks of going out, because this was the longest I had ever dated a woman, and I thought it might actually go someplace, rather than just one-night stands or whatever, I decided to be respectful and courteous, that I would tell her that I cross-dressed, and that someday down the line, I might want to be more than just a cross-dresser. Well, she was in the psychology department getting a higher degree in psychology, and I was getting my degree in military training, and she thought she could change me, and I thought she accepted me.
Cross-dressing is a term used to describe the wearing of clothing and adopting a gender role presentation that in a given culture is more typical of the other sex. Men and women who are transgender are not cross-dressers. They dress in the clothing of the sex with which they identify.
By 25 years old, I was looking at attempted murder charges, break-in and entry, theft, and the attempted murder was on a police officer. I attacked him in somebody's house while overdosing with a hatchet. Good thing I was in my own hometown. They knew who I was. And shit happens. They forced me into the program, and I went to a couple of rehabs while waiting for court.
So I spent the next 25 years of my life flying all over the world and living as a gay male. I had a series of serious boyfriends, and then I met my Patrick. He was a best friend, a confidant, eventually less of a physical partner, but we lived together for about 12 years. But as I got older, my late 30s, I started to, it was difficult to live my life. I was getting depressed more and more often, and it just felt like nothing about my life matched who I thought I was. And then I started to remember things. Little things from my childhood that I'd either sublimated or just plain forgot.
My head's going nuts. It's like a year has gone by, and my head is going crazy after meeting my girlfriend's roommate. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to think, and I'm just sitting there like, no, I'm a lesbian, you know? I'm not transgender. And at the time, I was so like almost disgusted by the fact that I was transgender, you know? Because everything that I've been taught has been so negative and been so like, no, you can't do this. You're a girl. You're a lesbian. And as time goes by, I get these like creeping feelings that like, no, I'm not a lesbian. I don't even like, I'm not a lesbian. Like, what am I? What am I? And when I looked in that mirror, I hated myself.
I was actually very depressed, very anxious. I was on medication for it, but this medication isn't helping me. Why isn't it doing this? And I was still trying to go for testosterone, and I don't know. And aside from that, because that was just on top of regular high school crap, and on top of divorce, and on top of everything just moving, it's just like, oh, by the way, this transition thing, gotta probably deal with that at some point. And so I was feeling very hopeless. I didn't want to live anymore. If this is how I'm gonna live, I don't want to live.
I got sober. I moved to Florida. In Florida, I was going for motorcycle technician, and I was one of the top students in my class, which kind of amazes me. And I proceeded to become a 100% biker, thinking that this was going to prove my manhood again. And I spent the next 20 years getting high. Throughout the years, I dressed on and off with different people. But I never felt anything, because it was masked by the drugs. It's different, you know? Kind of really weird. The life of a junkie.
There was one night I was very suicidal. I had a plan, really. I was, alright, this is it. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. And I remember I was sitting next to my cat, and it's crazy, but I really feel my cat kind of saved my life that day, you know? She's my best friend. Animals, get it. I remember I went downstairs, and I went to talk to my mom. She looked at me and was like, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I was just hysterical, you know? Just panicking. It's hard to transition. It's hard to live that life, and I just don't want to be alive. So she and my brother, they took me to Hasbro Hospital, and they checked me in.
When I looked in that mirror and I hated myself, that was dysphoria. I had no idea because I was never taught that it's okay to feel like this and it's normal to be trans. I was living with my girlfriend and her roommate, and I would see him like doing his injections, and I'd see him like planning his top surgery, and I just like get this feeling like, why do I want this so bad? I want to be just like him.
This is really common among a lot of trans people. You know, they just don't really feel like their physical self and their brain match up. And I guess in my like, I like to say that my mental transition is done and it's ongoing, but I took a really long time to get right in my mind before I changed my body.
I started to remember things, rewinding back when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. My mom, she had this pink terry cloth beach cover-up jumpsuit. It was hot pants with a big gold zipper up the front. It was the most outrageous and feminine piece of attire you could ever imagine, and I fetishized it. I developed, well, it was the focus of my world when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, so I stole it. I brought it up to my room. And I would just put it on and wear it. It wasn't sexual or protosexual, no. It was just the most happy and fulfilling thing I could do. And I remember lip syncing to Brandy, you're a fine girl, what a good wife you would be. Wearing this pink terry cloth jumpsuit. And my mom, she would find it in my room. We had this little unspoken tug of war. She'd find it in my room, bring it back to her closet and hide it. I'd find it in her closet and bring it back up to my room and put it back on.
Well, as I mentioned, my wife thought she could change me, and I thought she had accepted my cross-dressing, so we had children. Had 3 of them. And that complicated things, obviously.
Uh-huh.
But, you know, we stayed together. I mean, we had a very good relationship. Well, a little volatile at times. The more I stayed in the Navy, the more I got mad at people. So, I had a lot of anger issues.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, but, you know, through therapy, I learned that I wasn't really mad at everybody around me. I was mad at myself for not having had the guts to do what I should have done in the first place. So all that misery, that was one of the main reasons me and my ex divorced.
I'm 54 years old today. I made it. Everyone was betting I wouldn't make 25. I don't blame them. I would have took that bet too. It's me, just prior to basic training. There's my son. You know, when he heard I started transitioning, he stopped talking to me. There's my sister. She just started talking to me again. Oh, here's one from the wedding where my daughter took. I'm actually smiling in there. Oh, that's me as a dirtbag biker.
Oh, wow.
Big difference, huh?
Yeah.
We had Christmas parties and Easter parties, and Santa Claus was there, and the Easter Bunny was there. You know, all that stuff you're supposed to do with your kids. Taking them to museums and taking them to see King Tut at the museum there. Oh, want to know something funny? I love plays. I love Broadway. I love going to museums and planetariums. You know, all that sort of stuff. I'm not supposed to. I remember we went to see Little Shop of Horrors off Broadway. Oh, we had a blast. Going to the Playhouse to see Rocky Horror. That was the best. New York City, you know. I've been going to concerts since the 70s. Zeppelin, back in the 70s.
So, when I retired from the Navy, I decided I was going to change the rules. So my wife and I separated in 2009, and the kids would come to visit me every other weekend. So the other weekends were Tiffany's weekends. Now, at first, I just dressed in the house, and I ordered, I called the Avon lady to order some makeup, and then I bought all my clothes online. I mean, what else could I do? Well, the Avon lady lived right downstairs from me in the apartment complex. I mean, what are the odds of living right next to each other? But I struck gold. I mean, we became really good friends. But because of my anger issues and everything, my wife got a court order, and I couldn't see my 3 children. And I just didn't have the money to fight her, so I lost my visitation rights. I mean, the kids could have come to see me if they wanted to, but of course she didn't tell them that. And I couldn't just go there and pick them up. It's what I still regret till today.
My wife died in my arms of an overdose. So I got my letters and affairs as straight as I could. I went to a hotel room. started drinking, stuck a gun in my mouth. I pulled the trigger. And it didn't go off. I didn't understand why. I still don't today. I mean, I still have the shell, the cap, and the back on the primer. I know the gun worked because I have a friend who's still using it. I didn't understand what happened. So, since that didn't work, I proceeded to shoot 10 bags of heroin, a dirty tube colonic, and drunk a fifth of whiskey. Those two combinations could have killed a 450-pound horse. Didn't kill me.
Once I came out in 2011, I kind of just like kept going. Nothing could really stop me after that. I had my top surgery. I changed my name legally, so from Rachel to Ari. So that's mostly my progression in time. In terms of my transition, you know, I kind of struggled a lot up front, and then I just hit this breaking point where I was like, I can either be the person that everyone's expecting me to be, or I can just sort of go, who cares what those people think? Once you kind of just say, you know, these people don't identify me, I do, then I think that's really the turning point. Once I could take the power away from other people saying, this is what you are, it all came together for me, but that just took a really long time.
Are there any other issues that you've had to deal with in your life in terms of your transition? Oh, that was a really broad question.
Well, I was born intersex, and I have a high level of testosterone, so it's like that was almost a cue. And so my mom, it took her a while, but she's one of the most supportive people, and she had pretty much funded my transition, and she helped me get onto my feet. And if my mom had known, she had told me this numerous times, if she had known what transgender was from when I was a young age, I would have transitioned earlier. She would have let me, because in the media, we're looked down upon and we're seen as less than people because we're trans. One of my friends actually committed suicide pretty recently, and it's just like suicide rates among trans people is like 41%, which is 25 times higher than the national average. We're hated for being who we are.
In the hospital at Asbro. Being in the hospital kind of helped me because it made me sit back and think, okay, if I wasn't here, I would be dead right now. And I wouldn't go forward in that sense. But I remember thinking, there's so many people who are transgender. I think it's 49% who attempt suicide. And out of all of those people that are successful with it, that go through with it, their stories are gone. Their stories are silent. That's when I decided I had to survive. I had to keep going. I had to transition. I'm not just going to be another name. I'm going to be a face to that name. I'm going to make my story be heard.
A friend came to the hotel the next day, picked me up, put me in her car, and drove me to a hospital crisis unit. Next 2 months I spent in a mental institution. And I didn't say a word. I couldn't talk. I couldn't do anything.
A number of organizations have compiled statistics over the past several years on suicide within the transgender community. Each of these reports have a different methodology, but there are some general consistencies in their findings. Close to 50% of all transgender men and women have attempted suicide at least once. Among trans youth, over 30% have reported at least one suicide attempt. This contrasts with a 4.6% rate among the entire US population and 10 to 20% within the LGBT community.
After I came out, I was 19. I turned 20, started therapy, then started hormones. I'm 22 now, and I've been on hormones for 2 years and 4 months. And I've never been happier. I mean, I can look at myself in the mirror and I see who I really am. I can see this guy smiling at me.
So when I was in my late 30s, my mom became very ill. She had a form of leukemia that was killing her very quickly. Between diagnosis and death, it was just 2 months. But I took some time off from my flight attendant job to take care of her. I was working for Delta at the time. Pan Am had gone out of business, so I took some time off to take care of her. And 2 months later, she was dead. And as soon as we had the funeral, my world just fell apart in terms of trying to function as the person I had been. And I think all the ways that I had developed my entire life to not express my essentially female being, my transgender being, just fell apart because I think a lot of them were instilled by my mom. You know, my mother she was just trying to do her best, which I think happens with a lot of trans youth, even today, but she was trying to do her best to teach me all these little tricks of self-repression, so that I might learn to behave in a way that I could live in society.
Like I said, once I could take the power away from other people saying, this is what you are, it all just came together for me. Some people are scared to lose their family and friends, and I was just trying to make sure I knew who I was before I started making all the physical changes to myself that are really not reversible.
I constantly deal with transphobia, and my partner is non-binary. It's almost unnecessary, the amount of ignorance that we both face. So they're agender and go by they pronouns.
Could you please explain for the record what non-binary, what you're referring to?
Sure, absolutely. There's this thing that society has put in place, and it's seen everywhere. It's called the gender binary. So there's male and female, and that's what people see, and that's what they think there is. So that's called the binary.
So, before the court order, my kids would come over on my weekends, and they saw the clothes in my closet, but they never said anything. They just assumed it was one of my girlfriends, which I didn't have any girlfriends. But I wasn't going to, and they didn't ask. They were a lot younger at the time, though. So I was dressing every weekend that I could, and as time went by, finally I dressed and I went outside during the day, which was very scary. All these little things are just so scary. But eventually I found a club called the Dark Lady up here.
In Providence.
Yeah, in Providence. So I got brave, I got dressed, and I went there for a Halloween party. And so scared. I was just so scared. But I found that there was a lot of nice people there. I mean, I had never been to a gay bar before. Well, I don't want to call it a gay bar. It's a place for LGBT people to hang out.
Right.
So, I had a really good time. And I noticed that nobody in there was angry. Nobody wanted to fight someone else. It just wasn't like a regular bar I had ever been to. And I thought, this is what happy is. This is it. This is where I wanted to be all my life. Because you don't grow up and say, oh, I want to be angry. I want to be a son of a bitch. Oh, can I say that?
Oh, of course you can.
I'm technically a binary trans man, so I go by he pronouns. He, his, they're considered male pronouns. So non-binary people, they feel neither male or female, so they're agender. Gender is a spectrum, and there's tons of different people, and there's all walks of life, you know?
And so your partner prefers them, what, for a neutral pronoun?
They go by them, they, their.
Okay, so using the plural.
Yeah, gender neutral.
Right. Thank you for explaining that. I knew what you meant, but I wanted it on the record from your perspective.
Totally. My mom's side has been great because she corrects everybody and speaks up for me. My mom is super proud of me. She's tells everyone that she has a transgender son and is so proud, yeah, this is my kid. My dad has been accepting, but it's been a little bit harder for him because I was daddy's little girl. I was the youngest. I was always helping him work outside. I was a tomboy.
I have two sisters, and they're fine with it. Or, I mean, they mostly just don't care. They're like, whatever you want, you know. It's a little tougher for my mom. She still uses the wrong name and everything, and, even looking like this. So I mostly just find it funny, because we'll be out together, and people will be looking at her like she is absolutely nuts. And I'm just like, you calling me the wrong name and pronoun is really just making you crazy, not me. Grandparents, I think they mostly just try to avoid it altogether. They'll use the right name, they just avoid the pronouns.
Because I had a host of mental issues, I was able to receive my Social Security disability. Plus, I have 3 degenerating bulging discs in my lower back and 3 in my neck. I had hit a deer on a motorcycle a bunch of years back. Anyway, a friend of mine says, why don't you come over to Rhode Island? I had been in Pennsylvania at the time after Florida. And I said, yeah. You got a great weed connection. So I moved.
So like I said, I had to survive. I had to keep going. I had to transition. I remember at that point in the hospital, they diagnosed me with, I think it was called at the time, GID. Gender Identity Disorder. So from there, it was definitely a bit easier to get the hormones. My mom was like, all right. And from there, it was just a matter of convincing my dad, who I wasn't living with at the time. I'm not a big fan of him. He knows he screwed up with me and my mom. So I kind of just told him, this is what I want. This is what I'm going to do, and you need to respect that. And he kind of just went, okay.
So, after my mom died, as I said, my world just fell apart. I flew home after the funeral to Seattle, where I was living with Patrick. And luckily we were in Seattle because there was the Ingersoll Gender Center, which is the premier transgender support and advocacy group in the country. It was started by Martha Botzer in the 70s. And so I had started to go to this Ingersoll Gender Center, and that week, when I got back from the funeral, I made an appointment to start hormones and transition. Now, having never donned an article of clothing, female clothing, since that hot pink hot pants jumpsuit, I felt immediately better the first week I was taking hormones, calmer, happier, completely more peaceful, just by the act of taking hormones.
So in Rhode Island, I started dressing more regular. I would drive down the street to the Veterans Cemetery, and I would change, and I'd hang out all day long as a girl. I would go home, and I'd go back as a boy. I was allowing myself to feel things I never did, but by still getting high, it inhibited it. I made okay money on disability, but I needed more, you know? I needed a way to finance Joe to Josie. So I went back to selling drugs. I was good at selling drugs. And in due time, I became the #2 drug dealer in the state of Rhode Island and probably the surrounding area of Massachusetts.
I'll never forget the day I went in for my first shot. It was unreal. It was just, all right, I know I'm not going to feel anything right away, but this is where I start. This is kind of where I'm beginning. And it's weird because most people start when they're born, but for me, it was later on. So I started hormones that year in my junior year of high school, and the changes were just happening naturally. It was kind of like a second puberty. I never wanted the first one, but second puberty, second and last, thank God. But the changes were just happening naturally. I was already passing in public, before the hormones, but not 100%. So after the hormones, it was just, that's just a teenage boy going through puberty. Late bloomer, I guess. But it was just happening naturally. It was really cool to start to be able to fit into society as who I was and not pretending. I wasn't putting forth this fake face. I wasn't wearing a mask. I was fitting in as who I really was.
So I was going to the Dark Lady a lot, and, I'm not even going to lie to you. I was just going to get hooked up with a man to find out what sex was like with a man. I mean, it was totally experimental because I needed to know. Now, is this okay to talk about?
Whatever you want to talk about is fine.
All right, well, I had a couple of experiences, and I still wasn't sure. I still wasn't for sure if I liked being with men or not. But, at Christmas, I was talking to a friend of mine. The kids were at their mom's for Christmas and New Year's, and it was getting pretty lonely. So I was home, and I just called up a friend, and just to wish him Merry Christmas. And then out of the clear blue, I asked him what he was doing for New Year's, and he's like, nothing. So I'm like, well, you want to go out to a club with me? And he's like, one of your clubs? And I'm like, yeah, one of my clubs. And he's like, yeah, but there's no straight women there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you'd be surprised. Straight women go there all the time because the men don't hit on them. The men are there for the same reason. So he's like, all right, I'll go with you. So we went out for New Year's Eve, 13 to 14. And I was drinking pretty heavily that night. I don't drink very often, but I was drinking very heavily that night. And my friend said something to me. He goes, I love hanging out with Tiffany every day of the week. But Tom's an asshole. And I'm like, I've known you 28 years at this point, and it's the first time anybody has ever called me an asshole, like just irregular. And he's like, no, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to Tiffany. And I'm like, well, we're the same person. And he goes, no, you're not.
I'm always convinced that if someone likes you from the start as a person and you change, they're still going to like you. And I found that to be true. They might think it's strange and they're not going to understand it, but they don't treat me any differently. Let me give you an example. I used to be a civil engineer, and I don't do design work anymore, so I work on the wastewater fields, which is all utilities. So all the guys that work there are kind of like old and white. It's like 90% of the population. And the generation of guys that work in the business kind of tend to take care of their own, unfortunately. It's sort of how, it's like a good old boys club, and they're all these like Republican-looking rednecks, and it's funny because they love me, and they all know what I am, so it's crazy.
My grandmother on my dad's side, I didn't come out to her. The family told her, but the next time I saw her, she didn't slip one bit, and she used the right pronouns, correct name, and took me aside and told me how much she loves me. Then she told me she had a transgender sister who was assigned male at birth and transitioned to female in the 1970s. She passed away in the early 2000s, but my grandmother took me aside and said, I saw how much my sister struggled with this, and I saw how much it hurt her. And I'm never not going to accept you.
So the people I thought were going to be my biggest cheerleaders were sort of like, okay, that's kind of weird, but all right. And then the people I thought were going to, nothing to do with me were like, that's fine, who cares? Get back to work. It's incredible. If I were a trans woman, on the other hand, I'm not so sure how that would have went off. I do have some trans women folks I work with at the company, and they seem to be okay, but I think it would have been a lot tougher if I were on the other side,
Right.
unfortunately. Because, we live in a misogynistic and patriarchal society, so you're kind of trading down instead of trading up, which is ridiculous. Engineering's supposed to be like a typical male profession or whatever, but your gender doesn't say you can't be an engineer or not.
Right.
So anyway, what were we talking about? All right, the trans woman that I work with at the company. Kansas City, Missouri is the headquarters, which is not super trans-friendly, but the city is.
Oh.
And so the company follows the city's inclusion ordinances, so they're covered.
I see.
So, after everything, we're having breakfast on New Year's Day at Denny's, and I had a massive hangover, of course, and I said, I'm going to do it. Now, my friend forgot what he had said, but I remembered, because it bore right into my persona of who I am, of who I always thought I was. So I'm like, I'm going to transition. And he goes, whoa, wait a minute. You go out one night, you get drunk, and the next morning at Denny's, you decide this? And I'm like, well, you made me decide. He's like, well, what did I do? So I told him, I had to explain what he said, and he was like, well, I'm sorry. So effectively, January 1st of 14, I made the decision. I was 45 at the time. 45 years of Tom. I don't think there's gonna be 45 years of Tiffany. I don't think I'll live that long. So, I have to grab hold of what I have left and make the rest of my life right.
So I met a friend who had just started basically transitioning a little before me, which had been about a year. And they had just started hormones when we met. And because I didn't understand the whole process of transitioning, it really didn't matter, because I felt okay in my own skin, dressing every day and trying to be as feminine as I could. That was really okay for me, it really was. But then when I started learning about different things that you could do, medications, surgeries, and other things that could make me feel more like who I really am, I started looking into it.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 years after taking hormones, I scheduled, my mother had left me some money when she died, so I had the money and the time and the freedom to do it, so I scheduled my facial feminization surgery. That's very extensive facial surgery, specifically for trans women, so that they look more feminine. My hairline was cut and lowered 1.5 inches. My jaw was reshaped, about half the muscle mass were removed. My chin was completely reconstructed. There's very prominent differences between a male and a female chin. And I had a nose job, which is the theme of any Italian girl. And I walked out of that surgery. It was an 18-hour operation. So when you have surgery that extensive, facial surgery that extensive, you look like you're on the verge of death. Well, you look like you've been in the worst possible accident or train wreck imaginable, and it's extremely painful. More pain than I can ever remember or imagine, but I was happier than I have ever been in my life.
I don't like doctors. And I don't like paying doctor bills. And because of Medicare, I still have to pay 20%, and I'm not gonna pay a doctor. I sooner spend that on a new dress and a set of heels. If I had Imelda Marcus's money, I'd have twice as many shoes as she ever did. I definitely have a shoe fetish. 2012, I started full-time dressing. 10 months ago, I started hormone replacement therapy. I have actual breasts today. That makes me happy. I can walk out of the house without 22 pounds of makeup on, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with my somewhat manly tattoos. Some of them are really, how I got here, I don't know. But I do know that I am comfortable in my skin today.
Oh my. The first second I looked in that mirror, that swollen, bloody mess. It was a swollen, bloody woman looking back at me. I've never been happier. Oh, it's difficult to describe to anyone who isn't trans the kind of disconnect that happens when you look in the mirror and you see a stranger looking back at you. You look in the mirror and it's just surreal. It's maddening to just look and see someone who's not really who you are. And so for the first time in my life, that didn't happen.
Can I tell you a bad story if you want to hear it?
Sure.
I was living in Manchester, New Hampshire at the time. It's not a very good city. There's a high crime rate, but I love it. Anyways, this was right after I came out, and I was living there, and I had just gotten off of work, and I really had to pee. So I went to a McDonald's, and I went into the men's room. Like trans people, when they go into the bathroom, they just have to go to the bathroom. I don't know why people are like, oh, well, you're gonna peep on us. It's like, no, I just have to pee. Like, what do you do in the bathroom? Like,
So that was the start of my social transition. There is a standard of care for transgender people. It was established in the 50s and 60s. It was a response to Christine Jorgensen's very public transition. Now it's called the World's Physicians Association of Transgender Health. But for me at the time, the standard of care required a schedule for gender reassignment surgery, so I was scheduled a year away. I was required to live in my projected gender 24/7, so I was living as a woman with a penis 24/7. I had gone back to work as an international flight attendant after my facial surgery, and I was flying in and out of the Middle East.
So I go in there, and there were these kids that are like 17 to 20 in age group, and they kind of give me a look, and I'm like, whatever. I just go into the bathroom, and I do my thing. I come out, and I start to wash my hands, and like, I think it was like the ringleader goes like, are you a boy or a girl? And I'm like, well, I'm in the boys' room, so clearly I'm a boy. And he screams in my face that I'm an it. And he pushes me to the ground. And someone had knelt down behind me, and he tabletoped me to the ground. They all started kicking me all around, like in my stomach, in my chest, in my leg, in my back. Like one of them kicked me in the face, and like the ringleader guy started pulling down my pants and was like, check what gender it is, check what gender it is. And so they all started pulling down my pants, and I screamed no. And I ended up kicking him in the face and breaking his nose. And he stop. And let's go, let's go. He was almost crying, and his nose was wicked bleeding. They all run out, and they all just left me there, crying and holding my face and pulling up my pants, and just, I had never felt weaker in my entire life. I never felt worse in my entire life, because I had to pee and I just wanted to wash my hands and leave.
I had had my passport and my airline ID changed to female already, but I was flying in and out of countries where I could have been imprisoned or worse if they found out that I had a penis. Iraq, Afghanistan, Kurdistan. And I remember a very tricky time in Dubai going through customs where I was pulled out of line. I was with the rest of the airline crew. I had my uniform on, my passport, and my airline ID that said female on it, but something about me, maybe a lot about me, alerted the customs guy that I wasn't like the other women. So they pulled me aside and they put me in a little room. They called in 2 police officers and they started to have a very intense conversation in front of me in Arabic. They were pointing at me and laughing. And one of them took my passport and he came up to my face and he said, This isn't you. This isn't you. And I said, well, yes, of course it's me. I'm part of this crew. And I was pretty sure that if they detained me and pursued it, and found out I had breasts and a penis, that something very bad was going to happen to me.
I had never felt weaker in my entire life. I never felt worse in my entire life because I had to pee and I just wanted to wash my hands and just leave. Just gotten off a long day at work, and they all just couldn't see me as anything but an it. And this was before I started hormones and everything, so I still had a female voice and female, look, it was the scariest thing in my life.
The head flight attendant was a very strong woman, and she was a friend of mine. And I remember her banging on the door saying, let her out, she's part of our crew. And finally, they let me out, but after a lot of laughs and scoffing and derision. So when I got home, I called my doctor who was going to perform my gender reassignment surgery. It was still scheduled for 7 months out, but I called him and my psychiatrist, and I said, I think it's universally acknowledged that I'm going to go through with this transition. It's legally and physically dangerous for me to keep flying. I have to work. I have to keep this job. I want to keep this job. But it's extremely perilous to do so, flying in and out of the countries where I am as a woman with a penis. And so they did. They moved up my surgery by 6 months. So between the facial reconstruction surgery, the breast augmentation, the gender reassignment surgery was maybe 5 months, and then I was finally female. Not that I wasn't always female, but my anatomy finally confirmed the way I felt about myself.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I'm starting to love me for who I am today. I'm a strong, proud woman. Still a lot about me I have to find out, but I'm willing to find out. I'm 5.5 months sober now. I am practicing my Buddhism to the best of my ability today, and at some point it will get better, because I'm doing my best. I'm not trying to. I'm no longer trying. I can walk out the door without all that makeup on, just like any other woman my age that can. I got nothing to prove. I know who I am.
I had my top surgery about 5 months ago, and so now I'm glad I had it. I'm glad it's done. I can't even tell you. Yesterday, I drove around without a shirt on because it was hot, and it was exhilarating. I felt like one of those assholes who does that all the time. I hate those guys. But I was that guy yesterday, and it was amazing.
We have this little group on Fridays. We barbecue. And my friend Mike, the one that I took out to the club on New Year's Eve, had told everyone in the group except for Bill that I was transitioning. So Bill's the only one who doesn't know, so nobody can say anything, and I didn't even know they all knew. And I was like, Mike, really? This is like for me to tell people? Anyway, I went up to Bill and I said, I gotta tell you something. And it took me like 2 hours. And he was like, you're kidding me. This is cool. You know we're a military installation. Yeah. You're gonna knock their socks off. I mean, this is awesome.
Like I said, my story is just mine, so it's not representative of every trans person, and my story is actually pretty unusual. So what else do I want to tell people? I want to tell people that I know I'm lucky.
I have a trans pride sticker on my monitor at my desk at URI, and I can't tell you the number of people that see it and get this funny look in their eye. But I think the young LGBT community should see someone 30 to 40 years older than them that has a life and a job and responsibility. And who seems healthy and relatively happy and relatively sane.
I also have a funny story. I have a nephew, and from when he was like 2.5, like, I used to babysit him all the time, and he knew me as my old name. And so one day we were outside riding bikes, and he comes up to me and he's like, I wish you were a boy. And I was like, why? And he's like, so we could be buddies. And I hadn't come out to anybody yet. He did that probably like the day after I actually came out to myself. And I was like, guess what? I am a boy. And from then on, he started using male pronouns. And he was the first one I came out to. He sticks up for me, and he like corrects everybody who uses my old name. Like, he corrects everybody. When we're out in public, people will call me his daddy. I mean, he doesn't even correct them anymore. He doesn't. He actually told me the other day, and he was like, you're the closest thing I have to a dad. And that immediately, of course, made me like a sharp, like a gross snot bubble sobbing. He told me, and I was like, you know, I'm always gonna be around. I'm always gonna be there for you. And he's like, thank you, Eli. I love you. Like, I love you. And I'm like, I love you, Cleveland. There's nothing more validating than that.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you shared. I really appreciate it. And I know that when we're able to do the performance at URI, that your sharing your stories will help other people feel free to open up and share theirs. So thank you very much.
Thank you.